Check podcasts.
The Bread and Butter Collective is a collection of hospitality professionals working together to help strengthen our industry to build strong culture, community, and sustainability.
I'm Calen McNeil.
And I'm Sam Jones. And this is the Bread and Butter Podcast.
Welcome to the Bread and Butter Podcast. Hey, Sam, how are you?
Calen, I'm doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah. Hard week?
Yeah, it's been a hard week. And as we were talking before the show, it's good to be reminded of things that you've maybe said in the past. And I had one of my coworkers remind me or ask me to listen to one of our podcasts because it was relevant to what we were talking about or what we were thinking about in our business. And he reminded me to take my own advice, which was...
It's hard to do. It's easy to give it to someone else. It's hard to...
I was ready for it, though. I was ready for it because it's sometimes you get going down a certain direction and you have the answers inside you and you may have thought about them before, but it's good to have people that know you and to point things out that you're also willing to take. I'm always willing to take information and advice, and even if I don't like it, I'll sit on it and think about it. Which I think, at the end of the day, if I come to the conclusion that I don't like it, then I'll make a different decision or whatever. But a lot of the times I'm like,
You're very open that way. It's another. I'm going to add that to my list of the reasons why I like you so much. I got to get another page out for that list, though. It's getting too long.
Oh, way too long. Yeah. Oh, stop. Don't stop. Keep going.
It's, what, though? It's so easy to go and give business advice or life advice or any kind of advice to other people because you can really see what they're going through. And you don't have a vested interest. So you can see a clear path. You can be objective. And you can tell them that, but doing that for yourself sometimes is so hard. Like, I wish I could run my business like I convince other people to run their businesses.
Well, I think that's a good thing to remember is to go back and just look at the core things. And what that podcast was talking about is just back to the basics. Yeah. And, we've got a guest on today, and I think that is a really good, we always have these sort of like motifs through the show and ideas. And I think back to basics. And our guest is Krista Loughton. She's a City of Victoria Councillor. Full disclosure, she's also a business partner of mine. We do impact documentaries. She's a filmmaker.
She's also my sister.
And she's my sister. No.
So there's no way she's not.
She's not your sister.
She's not my sister.
Welcome to, but I want to tie that in is because I think we need to go back to the basics in a lot of the stuff that's going on in our world, where it comes to making sure the basics is
like shelter,
human rights of having housing, right? And also all the things that tie into that with the mental health, medical. We're paying the money. Like, this is the funny thing is we're paying all this money and it's not going anywhere that's actually helping. Let's get back to the basics. Let's figure out.
Who are we paying all this money to? Let's find out.
Krista, welcome.
Hello.
Well, and you're also one of my favorite people in the world and my best friend. So we have to add that in there too. You could be my best friend.
Oh, thanks. I was going to say, really?
Well, he's
really?
my
You
best
hide it so well.
So this might be a little bit more of an open conversation than a typical podcast since we're family sitting around here discussing this.
Well, and we all care. I think we all care about the city. We all care about people. That doesn't diminish the fact there's different ideas on how you get to the same point. But I think if you forget the humanity of it, then you're probably not the right person to be trying to figure and solve this, because I think humanity is where the motivation comes for me. It's just, you don't want to see people living that way.
I think it's really important that politicians spend time on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's what's different for me. The things I get worked up at council, maybe other councillors don't get as worked up about, but it's because I've seen it. I haven't lived it, but I've watched it and I made a film about it. And I think if people watch 940 Caledonia, the film I made about the flood in an encampment and how the government, the city moved people to a parking lot and set up a sanctioned encampment. But that whole story will really show people the reality of what it's like trying to survive in a tent in the winter.
Well, and we just literally had a
Oh, let's not call it
atmospheric bomb.
No,
what was it?
let's
Bomb
Bomb
cyclone.
cyclone.
Oh my god.
Oh,
we,
it's like
can we
the
not say
marketing
that
department
again?
on these weather events are really good.
The bomb cyclone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was brutal. It was brutal last night. I mean, did either of you step out? I had to take my dog out, and I'm like, this is.
Last week, I nearly got blown over going to
Yeah.
a meeting. Like literally, the wind almost took me off my feet,
Yeah, it's
which is insane.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that we don't have enough housing, shelters, transitional housing, inside spaces set up for people experiencing homelessness in our city, our region, our province, our country.
Let's go back one step.
Yep.
So you've just passed your 2-year mark on the city council.
Yes,
So obviously a lot of learning.
huge.
I obviously bias, but I think you've been doing a magnificent job,
Aw.
right? So keep it up. How's that
you.
experience been? Like describe a little bit, about the learnings, what surprised you? And then also about, grade yourself on effectiveness.
A lot of politicians will say this when they first get into their seats. Like I've heard our MLA and our MP use this analogy as well. It's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much, like the first year.
Yeah.
Like there's so much information coming at us. There's so much we need to know. But after the first year and a half, it kind of gets a bit easier because you have all of that knowledge and you know what
The known knowns,
FSR
the known
is
unknowns,
and all of the different things
Yeah.
we need to know about developments and setbacks and all of these decisions that we're making about issues. So it's getting a little bit easier. And I actually looked up my flyer from when I was campaigning and I'm like, I've done some of these things.
Yeah.
Not everything. There's
Yeah.
still some things I need to work on. My vision of a city of communities and working on neighborhood villages is something I really want to lean into more in the second half of the term. But there have been a lot of things around homelessness, mental health. We funded the rent bank. All these things that I had written, I've done. So I'm going to try to tick off everything on that list if I can. So my life isn't the same. The mayor told me or told all of us, you're not Krista Loughton anymore. You're Councillor Loughton, and every time you leave your front door, you're Councillor Loughton, and that's true. And things happen that you don't expect to happen, like as issues come up, and you have to react to it in the moment sometimes, and you're just, trying to be as thoughtful and understanding and doing the right thing in the moment. But sometimes, things move quickly, so you want to be making the right decision.
Well, and information changes too. I think, just touching back on the drinking from a fire hose comment is it's easy for people who are in it. So if I'm a developer, I kind of know the development world. So I can be critical of Krista Loughton not, doing what I want to do. But you got to understand the Krista Loughtons of the world, the Jeremy Caradonas of the world, the Dave Thompsons of the world. They don't necessarily, they bring their bucket of knowledge to the table, but if they haven't done developments before, they got to learn it. Because if you're actually a conscientious person and you want to do the job well, you're going to find out as much information as you can, because if you're expected to make decisions on it. And I think that's part of the understanding and leeway that people in politics need to have, especially of new members of council.
So maybe a good question is, because you would expect there would be a lot of new politicians coming in all the time, getting fresh perspectives.
Well, and just to interrupt for 2 seconds, this council, all of us were,
Yeah.
except for Chris Coleman and of course Marianne, the mayor.
Yeah. So where do you learn the information you need to learn? Take maybe the development issue, because as we're talking about it, how do you become an expert? Who's teaching you?
Well, all the staff reports. We also have policy documents like master plans for absolutely everything. You read up on all of that. We can ask staff any questions. I have a...
It takes time though.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And I have a really great relationship with the city manager, so I can, she's technically our only staff person, so I can go to her and ask questions. I meet with developers and ask questions, like they themselves educate me on things. And the good news is it doesn't take that long. Like, it's just information, it's knowledge, it's educating yourself. So then once you've got it, you've got it. Like next term, if I choose to run again and I am honored enough to be elected and I serve another term, it'll be a totally different term.
Yeah.
Right.
You'll kind of have that learning curve over.
I'll have
base
I'm
understanding.
not a rookie anymore.
Yeah.
I'll have all this information.
Be able to hit the ground
And, I think you it would be kind of silly not to do 2 terms in a way, unless you're really not liking it, because of all the groundwork you do in term 1, and then really let's get stuff done in term 2. Although I have to say, I think this council is getting stuff done right away in our first term.
Yeah,
We're
I
not,
would agree. I would
don't
agree with that.
None of us are wallflowers,
Yeah.
and we're getting things done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So obviously, we're getting into winter. The area of housing and unhoused is your specialty. You've built a career on that. You've probably the most informed person in that area.
Well, it is my day job.
Yes.
I have to say, I was talking with someone the other day, and they were saying, kind of giving me political advice. And, the thing you need to watch out for is being a single issue councillor. And I heard that a lot when I was campaigning too. And you asked me, I think in the beginning, what surprised you and what has been. So I think I struggle with that a little bit, because it is such a huge issue. I think it's the number 1 issue in our city, and homelessness is not a single issue.
Yeah. No, it's
multiple issues. that
It's
lead to
so
that.
complicated. Like, if you compare that to, like, what can we do for climate action, or what can we do for housing, or what can we do for the arts community? Like, those 3 things they're really straightforward solutions, and homelessness is not. And there's a whole bunch of branches off it. It's housing, it's shelter, it's transitional housing, it's mental health, it's addiction, it's the opioid crisis, it's our bylaw department, it's our police department,
zonings, bylaws.
it's like there's so much there. So that's one thing I think I kind of struggle with, because I go back and think, okay, I need to be doing more, I need to be working on other things besides homelessness. And then I'm like, but why? Like, this is our biggest issue. Why don't I just lean into this as much as I possibly can and try to move the needle in our city as fast as possible? Matt can take care of the arts, and Dave and Jeremy have housing or whatever. And
Well, that's the point of
Councillor
having
Hammond-
a diverse
Councillor Hammond
council,
talks
right?
a lot about security and the need to protect house residents in neighborhoods that have encampments, and that's super valid. And we don't always agree on things, but we really like each other. I hope he likes me. I really like him. And we have good conversations about it. And Councillor Gardner, we're not always on the same page, but there are touch points. Like, we all need to be working together. Chris Coleman, I sit beside him now.
Yeah.
He teaches me all sorts of things. So and Susan has a lot that she brings to the table too, and around homelessness and things. So it's like all of us need to be doing our part. But if one of us has somewhat, like, I don't mean to call myself an expert, but I probably have the most experience working with people with lived experience, which is really important. They're the ones that have the answers. They're the ones that are going to help us through this. And so that's what I struggle with, I suppose, this single issue councillor situation. But what has surprised me the most is how effective we can be as advocates.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a filmmaker and I'd reach out to the MLA, you might get a response back. As a councillor, you get a text back right away.
Right.
Well, that's the impact, because this is multi-jurisdictional. You've got the city, which has very few levers, which is like pretty disappointing, considering there's only so many things that you guys can do to change, especially when you have the province that's responsible for the healthcare system, right?
Yeah, and housing.
And you got the feds ultimately
shelters.
responsible for the budget, right? But also justice, right?
Oh, the
and
justice
health
piece.
as well? Are they?
And the feds are responsible for housing as well.
Yeah.
It's all been downloaded onto municipalities
Yeah. Which is,
completely unfairly, and the system has been dictated by the courts.
yeah.
So it's just a blunt instrument rather than thoughtful people sitting
How
around
does
and trying
that
to
work? Sorry, that they're the courts.
Well, in 2008, there was a case. It was the Adams decision, which voted in favor of the Charter for Liberty, Life, Liberty, and Section 7 of the Charter. But it's to protect people from the elements.
Okay.
So the decision was that unhoused people could set up a tent in a park, and under a bylaw that was lawful, but it only could be from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So then what happened, that was a huge vindication in human rights, a huge win for people experiencing homelessness. But what's happened since then is that municipal parks have become de facto shelters. And
they should have actually just made a mandate the government provides
housing. If that would have been part of that, like fighting for your right to housing rather than your right to enact like to put up a tarp or something to protect you from the elements, that would have been helpful. That didn't happen. And now it where are we 15 years later? Help me with the 17
16
or whatever.
17 years later.
It has taken the province and the feds off the hook.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. Like it doesn't work for the neighborhood. It doesn't work for the unhoused. People are trying to survive in tents. Like
it was basically scapegoat to not allow, government to do their core responsibilities, right? And people, I know the city of Victoria has been criticized in the past for not focusing on core responsibilities of the city. But guess what? Like what are we complaining about? We're complaining about safety. We're complaining about criminal justice. We're complaining about drugs. We're complaining about seeing people living on the street like that they need medical help. A lot of them, right? So that's not a core principle of the city, but this is what we're complaining. I'm not complaining about.
But they are my residents.
No. But don't misconstrue or misunderstand what I'm trying to say about it. Is on one hand, we as citizens, certain citizens are like, well, focus on potholes and roads, and is a core city responsibility, property taxes, all that kind of stuff. But what are we actually complaining about? We're complaining about this poor person that's living on a stoop that isn't sheltered, is hungry, is obviously drug addicted in some cases. And what are we doing there? But that's what we're complaining about. But we're asking you to do something about it in our city, but your hands are kind of tied. Like,
absolutely. All I've got is advocacy.
Yeah, and this is where the advocacy component comes, which is so important, right?
Yeah. And the bylaw is like, oh my goodness, it gets so messy. But if there was one thing I could do this term, it would be to get bylaw out of the lives of the unhoused, which means we can't have people camping in parks. We can't have people camping on sidewalks, boulevards. We need to open spaces. And the city has done that, like with Dowler.
So talk about what's happened.
Okay, so what has happened in this last year I advocated very hard for the it's called the extreme weather response shelters to be converted into winter shelters. And we had some success with that. Our place opened an extra 20 mats and it was a winter shelter. And then St. John the Divine was opened with 30 mats. It was run by Solid. Do you know what Solid is?
Yeah.
So they're a Solid Outreach. They're an organization that is run by people who all have lived experience of homelessness and drug addiction. And they really tend to the ones that really no other service provider can manage. Now, other service providers listening to this will argue with me about it, but really the ones that have been evicted everywhere they go are still, it's not, I want to say welcomed, but they still, I think Solid, just because they have lived experience and they're people that have been there, it's easier for them to relate to those people and they're able to give them services. So that opened. And then at the end of April, they were all set to close, and it was turned into a permanent shelter. So St. John the Divine went permanent through HARTH, which is the Homeless Encampment Action Response Transitional Housing. There's this MOU that we signed with the province, that the city signed with the province, called HART and HARTH, and it's encampment outreach and transitional housing. So St. John the Divine became a HARTH site for 2 years. And I don't know, I like to think I had something to do with it, but I'm not sure that I did or not. I may not have. This all might have been happening behind the scenes. You don't really know because the province is doing this. But the day that St. John the Divine was supposed to close, there was a chamber luncheon with the premier. I think you were there, Calen.
Yes, that's right.
And I had a picture taken with him and just said to him, you know that if we don't extend these shelters into permanent, there's going to be 50 more people out on Pandora as of tomorrow. And he flagged it for Ravi Calen, and that next day, St. John the Divine stayed open. But I don't know. I don't want to say, because there might have been a whole bunch of other things happening.
But listen, it's advocacy,
but
right? You're asking the question.
But those are the kinds of things, like advocacy isn't necessarily just calling things out in the media. It's knowing the right person to call or text or taking advantage of a situation. Oh, there's the premier. I'll ask for a selfie and then, give him a couple sentences and see what happens, right? Our place ended up shutting down, but it was reopened. The province announced 72 more shelter spaces in August. So of that, 20 was there, and there's another 52 supposed to be coming online. And I'm not sure if they're all online even yet.
So is that an increase? So
yeah. For Victoria,
the 50 is a clear increase because what was before? Maybe 30? Like how many
shelter spaces we have in?
The winter emergency response.
Oh, the emergency response. No, this is a different. It gets very complicated. The EWR, so the emergency
weather response,
is different. What I'm talking about had nothing to do with that. We're just talking about winter shelters and permanent shelter spaces. EWR comes online when the temperature drops to a certain level. There's a whole bunch of different criteria for activation.
Can I ask a question? How many homeless people are there in Victoria?
Well,
is there a good count or an average count?
We don't actually know because the point in time counts that are done every year don't disaggregate the data. It's just a number for all of Greater Victoria. So in Greater Victoria, the last count, which is always an under count because, but minimum 242 in Greater Victoria of unsheltered homeless people. There's
242.
Yeah, there's 1665 homeless people, but that includes people living in supportive housing, people in jail, people in hospital, people couch surfing, the hidden homeless,
that are going to hit the streets once in a while.
Yeah,
they
don't have housing, but they're precariously housed, or so they're inside somewhere. That's 1665.
And is that in the Greater Victoria area?
Greater Victoria,
Saanich and
so that's all 13 municipalities. 13 Not sure if it includes Salt Spring though. But anyway, it's all of our municipalities, but we really need to disaggregate that data because we need to know how many are in each municipality, so that other municipalities can set up social services for their unhoused population. But there was some news lately, like when all the fences and everything went up on Pandora, BC Housing, I believe they were saying there was 63 people sheltering on Pandora, and they had found shelter for all of those people.
But our place just sent out I got a notice about it that they, as of I think their goal was the end of the year, but they've basically every single person individually was lifted into some more stable situation, like transitional, but they're not living on the street
or a shelter. But we're still seeing so many displaced people around Pandora, right? Like, so it's hard. I mean, it's like we're not, what they're saying and what we're seeing isn't really the same thing.
I heard the other day that they're dismantling the Pandora encampment. Is that true?
Well, that's part of what we're talking about. And also those decisions were made through the HART situation table as well. So and on that table there are city representatives, but it's also the Ministry of Housing, BC Housing, Island Health, I think there's a representative from the police department, social services, all get together and talk. And the decampment of Pandora was a plan that was constructed through the Heart Table.
Interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see whether it works, right?
Yeah,
like,
well,
I mean, what is working? Because
my concern with it is there's too many displaced people. That doesn't help. And once the Dowler hub opens and the rest, so those other of those this gets really confusing, but of those 72 shelter spaces I mentioned, of which 20 were at our place, I think 32 were going to be at the Salvation Army, which is abstinence based. So it's not always going to, that's not going to work for the everybody. Pandora population, but it might work for other people sheltering downtown. And then also 20 some at another location, but I don't think those, so I don't think 50, I'm not sure about those 52, whether they're online yet or not, but in my opinion, those should have all been online and then put the fences up and do what you have to do. Right?
Yes.
But that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I think when Dowler does open and as much, pushback on that has happened, I think
describe the Dowler.
I think Dowler is going to be a game changer because it's run by Solid. It's going to be an access hub for people to get connected to services, right? Get connected to housing or to detox or to treatment and all those things. And it's run by, again, people with lived experience that really understand.
So is this just an organizational hub to try to connect the people with needs with the services that provide it?
Yeah. So, but it really serves, I hate using language like this because it really hits unhoused people. Like when you talk about being the hardest to house or the ones that need complex care, what I would say is the ones that are the most traumatized, the ones that are having the hardest times, the ones that need the most support and love are who Solid and that Dowler hub will serve.
Where is the Dowler hub going to be located?
It's on Dowler.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
Dowler.
Where's Dowler?
Place, I think.
Is that over?
Okay, so you know where the arena is? It's to the north of the arena. And
it's in North Park, basically.
Yeah, it's at the, it's like just off Blanchard. There's a Island Farms Dairy is there, and then Princess Street. But, with the election and everything, it became really politicized. But another thing I did, was I brought a motion about half a year ago for when Caledonia Place reopened again, for there to be a street ambassador there to help, rather than security, have actual people with lived experience walking around the neighborhood, making sure everything's okay, and they have a phone number that neighbors can call, and Solid does this work really well. So there is an ambassador program happening around Dowler Place. It's already up and going right now. So through Solid, so they have red T-shirts on with ambassador outreach. They've got a phone number. So if you live on Princess Street and someone's rummaging through your recycling or stealing Johnny's bike, you can call, and then an ambassador will come and go, "Hey, buddy."
Yeah.
And they'll know the person. No, you don't have to call the police,
right?
and you can just say, and they'll probably know who it is. I'm not trying to stigmatize, but the theft and all of that comes with addiction, comes with poverty, comes with, so they can just say, "Buddy, you can't do that." And the person will listen because it's their peer, and if you do that, if you're doing that kind of behavior, you're putting it at risk of having our service taken away. So let's be good neighbors. Let's not upset the neighborhood. And if we can get somewhere with that, I think that would really help. Really, really help. Because if a social service goes into your neighborhood and doesn't bother you in any way, whatever.
Right.
But if people are on your property and leaving a mess or stealing things or whatever, then you're just like, nobody wants that, right?
It has to be integrated. We all have to live together. Right.
Yeah, and I think these ambassadors can help be the go-between in that. So I have great hope for that being successful for that access hub.
Where you see the ambassadors, do you see a decline in the police presence that need to be there or come whether they're needed or not?
I hope so, but we don't have the
Too early for the
data
data?
on that
early?
yet. But I hope so. I hope it helps the police department because that's another huge thing. Like,
Yeah.
how do we know how much money in the police budget is actually spent on dealing with homelessness, which is not our jurisdictional responsibility, but
And
we
it's
have
not a
all the
crime
fallout for it.
necessarily, right?
Sorry?
And it isn't a crime to be homeless.
No, but
Well,
the, but
it's-
it,
There's
but
crime
that
there's
way,
crime
though.
that revolves around it, maybe, but
Yeah.
It
And-
is definitely not a crime, and there is a criminal element as they say because
Well,
there's
they
a lot
prey
of
on
money
it.
to be
Yeah.
made selling
Yeah.
drugs, right? But not everybody is part of that. That's for sure,
not
right?
at
Like,
all.
and so we need to. It's a healthcare issue. Homelessness is
Well,
absolutely
you've got the
a healthcare
policing
issue.
budget, and they also have the healthcare budget. Like the amount of money that is spent. I know my wife is a X-ray tech at the Jubilee Hospital, and Karen, which is
My Karen from
your
Us and
Karen
Them,
from Us
yeah.
and Them, who, like, she knew Karen very well from having been literally weekly coming in for scans and needing care and all that stuff, which is a human right. But the amount of money, if Karen now, like her visits to the hospital